Retro Mondays.
Hey, what's happening, gamers? It's K-Wing here, bringing you yet another Retro Monday to turn your Monday into a fun day. Today's classic game is Street Fighter II: The World Warrior, the mega-hit sequel to the virtually unknown Street Fighter, a fighting game that released and was developed by Capcom for the arcades back in 1987. However, Street Fighter II was responsible for the massive boom, spread, and popularity of the fighting game genre that created a worldwide phenomenon, which kickstarted in 1991. To capitalize on the growing demand of the Street Fighter II arcade cabinets, Capcom began porting the game to home video game consoles. Thus, in 1992, they released a port of the Super Famicom in Japan, and the US saw the game arrive on the Super Nintendo in the summer. The Sega Genesis would get some type of Champion Edition, and the other consoles would get later installments in the series. The reason why this game is so significant to video game history is the fact that Street Fighter II was the first 16 megabit game to be released for a home console. The graphics simply blew people's minds to the max, Jack. I can just remember how excited both my dad and I were to get our hands on this title for the Super Nintendo back in the day. We loved playing it in the local arcade while my mom and sister were out shopping at JCPenney's or something. Though if you remember those old coin-up arcade machines, they ate up a lot of cash really fast, so that wasn't very ace of the machines. Still, Street Fighter II became one of our most played games at the time, and there was good reason for this. It was fun and awesome to play. For a kid that grew up with Link, Mario, Samus, Simon Belmont, Mega Man, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Street Fighter was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. After that day, I was hooked on the fighting game genre, and to this day, it's still one of my favorites in the series. Street Fighter II: The World Warrior featured 8 playable characters. As you went through the main game, you would face another opponent in one-on-one combat. Every once in a while, you would have a minigame to ease the tension, and after all the main fighters were defeated, you would fight the bosses. These bosses really tested one's skills, and players met the likes of Balrog the Boxer, the Deadly Vega, the Muay Thai boxer Sagat, and the final villain was M. Bison, the head of Shadowloo. Listen, they don't call these guys the 4 Grand Masters for show. Another reason that this game was so amazing for its day was the gameplay and fighting mechanics. Capcom's Fighter allowed players a choice between the diverse fighters, which created a lot of replay value right off the bat. Also, this is the first one-on-one fighting game to give each fighter a moveset of over 30 moves, including being able to grab, grapple, or throw one's opponent, and 3 unique special moves for each of the characters. However, Ryu and Ken both share the same moveset, though Capcom was very clever to hide this by stating that both men learned from the same martial arts master. Aside from the single-player game, Street Fighter II did have a versus mode where you and a friend could duke it out. This is where I spent most of my time playing the game and loving every second of it. So, what did I have wrong with this game? Honestly, not much really. There wasn't much to compare to past games in terms of the fighting game engine, so Street Fighter stood out. I mean, literally. It was better than all the other fighting games that came before it. Street Fighter II is the game that rebooted the fighting game formula, and it did a stellar job of it, I have to say. However, I do have some slight issue with the game's difficulty. Keep in mind this has to do with past memories of the game from when I was little. One of the things I couldn't stand about World Warrior when I was smaller had to be Vega and the Sagat boss battles. These guys were brutal, and I mean very brutal. Vega was an unpredictable fighter, and this had to do with his speed and his agility. It was next to impossible for me to beat this game on the last star difficulty, and Vega didn't make it any easier. Really hate that guy. Sagat was hard because he would spam the crap out of you with tiger after tiger after tiger, then finish you with a tiger uppercut, and above all else, laugh at you when he beat you. I really hated that, and as a little kid that made me want to toss my controller at my TV. But then if I did so, well, I'd be out of a controller and a TV, so I didn't end up doing that. Probably just threw the controller up against the wall and had it duct taped back together again. Ah, duct tape. Still, that's all I really had wrong with this game. Seriously, what's not to love about Street Fighter 2 though? It was such a revolutionary game and is still fun to play today. Looking back on this game, my favorite characters to play as in the Street Fighter franchise hasn't really changed. I loved playing as Guile, Chun-Li, Ken, and my main, of course, is still Ryu. I loved how each fighter played differently and the super moves were so totally rad. Another aspect about this game and its series that is so choice has to be the story. Each fighter comes from a complex background and has his or her own reasons for entering the tournament. One of the greatest additions to the game had to be its music. I mean, it's so totally awesome! Besides it being amazing and so well scored, I noticed that each composition reflected not only the character's nationality, but also their personality as well. Let me tell you folks, that takes an incredible composer to pull that off. Over the years, there's been some wicked cool tracks, though Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, and Guile are my favorite themes of all time. Seriously, what doesn't go with Guile's theme song? Asking if this game has lasting appeal seems like an obvious no duh. In fact, Street Fighter 2 is a series that shows just how much a company can milk a franchise while still maintaining its popularity. And in that respect, Capcom are pure geniuses. After the success of Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior, Capcom released Champion Edition in Japan for the arcade and PC Engine, which allowed players different color palettes for their fighters, made the bosses playable, and allowed for players to play as the same character without the game freezing up. Next up was Street Fighter 2 Turbo or Hyper Fighting, which came out a year later for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. It featured all the stuff from Champion Edition, plus the gameplay was much faster, and characters had either additional movesets or, in Ryu's case, the ability to tornado kick in the air, which I used a lot. Another year went by and Capcom delivered another Street Fighter 2 update. This game was called Super Street Fighter 2 and added 4 new characters to the mix: Cammy, Fei Long, DJ, and T-Hawk. Plus, each fighter had a more powerful main attack, such as Ryu's Fireball now burst you into flames. See what I mean by milking the franchise? The 5th entry in the series was called Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and was the debut of Akuma. As far as I know, the final installment of Street Fighter 2 is dubbed HD Remix, which released for the PSN and Xbox Live in 2008, a year before Street Fighter's comeback. This game featured anime character sprites and movesets similar to the Alpha series, and was a pretty cool game. Thanks to Street Fighter 2's success, the series broke into a subcategory of games such as Alpha, EX, Capcom vs, Third Strike, and of course Street Fighter 4. Each of these series all featured updates, and Street Fighter 4 has already had 2 updates from Super to Arcade. Look, I know everyone has their favorite Street Fighter 2 game, but mine will always be Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Though I think my favorite all-time Street Fighter game has to be Street Fighter Alpha 3, because I had the biggest character roster and it was just an amazing game to play. Since Street Fighter 2 is available pretty much on everything from consoles, arcades, to even portable devices, pretty much everyone has come across one or more of these games in their lifetime, and if you haven't, I'm amazed. For you Wii owners out there, if you've never played Street Fighter, there are actually 4 games on the system, from the World Warrior, Turbo, Super, and Alpha 2. The question remains though, do I think Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior is worth checking out? Honestly, if this was the only incarnation of Street Fighter 2, then I would say definitely. But since it isn't, I would suggest going with Street Fighter 2 Turbo. In fact, I reviewed that game several years ago, so why don't you check that out for more details on that game. Personally, World Warrior was just too slow for my tastes, and a little bit buggy, but not too bad. Other than that, it's a tubular game and laid the foundation for fighters that we play today. So please join me by lifting your controllers high into the air and wishing Street Fighter another 25 years of success in this industry. Well, thus wraps up another Retro Mondays. Join me next time for a mid-90s classic, Mario Kart 64 for the Nintendo 64. Which is still regarded by many gamers as the best in the series, or at least one of them. This was the first time that Mario appeared in the 3D realm for his Mario Kart series. And that's going to do it for me, folks. If you liked what you saw, please hit the thumbs up button and leave a comment below. I would really love to know what your favorite Street Fighter 2 game is of all time. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to watch, and until we meet again, gamers, God bless and happy gaming. Have a great rest of the day.